Mr. Clark here. Time to go through topic 9.4. This section, we're going to be looking at immigration into the United States in the late 1800s. So you can see in the visual represented at the top, many people kind of reference the United States as the melting pot of the world, meaning that we have so many different cultures, languages, religions, and people from many different countries who've settled here in the United States. So as you move forward into 9.4, make sure that you have opened your Google Doc to make sure that you have all the needed information, all your correct answers. Once again, you don't have to rewrite all your answers or retype them. Just make sure you have something similar to what I mentioned. You can add to your responses if they're a little bit light. If you have a blank, make sure you fill it in. So some of the main objectives in 9.4 are looking at new immigrants in the late 1800s, comparing them to the earlier immigration periods in American history, looking at the push, things that kind of drove people out of other countries to send them here to the United States, the pull factors, what attracted immigrants to coming into the United States, really the challenges that immigrants faced as they moved into the United States. And we'll see how immigrants adapted, or in some cases did not adapt, to American life and culture. New immigrants seek better lives for themselves. Question 1. How did the foreign-born population in the United States change from 1870 to 1900? It nearly doubled from 1870 to 1900 as we saw a tremendous expansion in the number of immigrants coming into the United States. 2. Why were many longtime American citizens concerned about the influx of immigrants coming into the United States? Were their opinions correct? Have opinions changed in contemporary times? Many Americans feared that the newcomers would damage American culture, steal their jobs. Many of the people who were working and had been living here in the United States for some time still were unskilled workers, and therefore immigrants were a direct threat to them because they didn't need to have a significant background or experience to kind of work for a lower wage and take their job. Instead, Americans adopted part of immigrants' cultures, while immigrants adopted parts of American culture. And that's even true today. We see a lot of different cultures who have influenced the United States in a positive fashion, and we kind of enjoy the different cultures and the cultural aspects of the United States today. The contribution of immigrants combined with the existing culture helped to shape the American culture into a diverse and unique whole. However, there are still many Americans who have similar fears to the periods of time here of the late 18 and early 1900s. 3, compare and contrast. What were the new immigrants that came to the United States between 1870 and 1900 different from earlier immigrants? So really what we're doing here is just kind of comparing old immigration prior to 1870 to the newer immigration in the late 1800s. So earlier immigrants were mainly from Western Europe. Some, such as those from Ireland, already spoke English. Many of the Irish, as we know, they came over in the middle 1800s during the Irish potato famine, which kind of hit its height in the late 1840s. Many of those who came to the United States were Protestant. Many already had family in the United States. So as a result, these immigrants found it more, easy to adjust. It was easier to adjust for them, easier to fit in. Many of the people who were coming from Western Europe or from Great Britain or Ireland, they spoke English, so it wasn't a cultural shock for them in terms of learning the language. They actually kind of just blended right in. In contrast, the new immigrants during the later 1800s often had little or no family in the United States. When they entered the United States, coming from Eastern and Southern Europe, they often spoke a different language. You had people from Germany, from Poland, from Italy. They spoke a different language. Also, too many of those who are coming in were now Catholics or Jews, and as a result, they faced a lot of religious prejudice from the Protestants who had settled here for a long period of time. After 1900, immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe made up more than 70% of all immigrants, up from about 1% in the middle 1800s. So we see a dramatic shift in terms of where a lot of the people are coming from. In question 4, we're going to look at the push and pull factors that led to immigration coming into the United States. Once again, just to, refresh your memory, a push factor is an event or circumstance that compels people to leave their homeland in order to live in better circumstances. A pull factor is the quality that attracts people to the United States. So the reasons why they got pushed out of their homeland: famine, political persecution, religious persecution, sometimes revolution and warfare, poverty. Pull factors: economic opportunity, free or inexpensive land, plentiful jobs, and religious freedom. Five, how did the United States encourage people to move west? How do private companies aid in this movement? Why? So the United States government in 1862 had passed the Homestead Act, which made farmland in western parts of the United States very inexpensive. This motivated people to move out west to start their own farms. Railroads supported this movement as we began to construct the transcontinental railroad across the United States. Farming communities and towns began to spring up near the construction of the railroads. They knew that the profits would increase. If more people move west, the more people west, the more their profits would increase. Many companies, too, began to recruit workers for jobs out west, which really helped to motivate people to go out west. 6, how did chain immigration promote and support immigration in the United States? Chain immigrants were those who joined family or friends who had already settled in America. So they already had kind of a foundation here, and they kind of joined that family foundation and kind of became an extended family structure in the United States. The immigrants who had arrived earlier promised to help the newcomers find work, housing, and sometimes they even sent them tickets for the journey. Immigrants may have lured their families and friends to America with the promise of religious and political freedom. 7, list the common themes of the immigrant experience. Well, obviously, anytime you are in a foreign country and you have to move thousands of miles away to an unknown destination, so it's always a very difficult decision just to kind of get up and leave your homeland to come here into the United States. Coming across the Atlantic often was a hard, costly journey with an uncertain end. They would face the difficulties and the challenges of learning a new language, adjusting to foreign cultures. However, most immigrants came to America with an optimistic hope, optimistic attitude that things would get better. Coming to America was a big task. Travelers needed money for passage and to make a new start. Although some had only enough for a ticket, list the steps they took prior to departing their home nation for the United States. First thing they had to do was to sell off their excess items because they certainly could not bring everything with them, pack whatever they could. Usually they brought only what they could carry: clothes, maybe some photographs of loved ones, a cherished musical instrument, or tools or their trade. Next, they made their way to a port of departure, hoping that ship would be leaving in an expedient fashion. In a war-torn area, one that might be going through a revolution or war, just getting to the ship could be a very dangerous process. Why were first and second class passengers able to enter into the United States right away, while third class passengers, this is called steerage, kind of the lowest class, the cheapest ticket you could buy to the United States, they had to pass through Ellis Island. Most of the passengers in steerage were poor, lacked money or support to make a start in the United States, and sometimes there was fear that they might be carrying with them disease or a virus. Some Americans feared that immigrants desperate to work would take away American jobs and drive down wages. Still, other Americans were afraid that immigrants would overburden the social welfare system. Ellis Island was a way to screen out what we considered here in America at that time as the undesirables, people who could not maybe contribute to American society. So you can see here in this photograph, that's Ellis Island. You see the patriotic American flags. And here's another visual. Immigrants arrive at Ellis Island in New York Harbor in the early 1900s. So any immigrant who came to the East Coast, in particular in the New York City area, they would get checked in at Ellis Island. On the West Coast, they had something similar to Ellis Island. It was called Angel Island. A processing center, in particular for Asian immigrants, opened up in San Francisco Bay in 1910. If Ellis Island was welcoming to some, Angel Island was always formidable. It was designed to filter out Chinese immigrants. So in some ways, it was a little bit easier to come in through Ellis Island versus Angel Island. Here's a quote. I realized that Ellis Island could inspire both hope and fear. Some of the passengers were afraid, others impatient, anxious to get through the inspection and be off to their destinations. Quote from Edward Coursey in The Shadow of Liberty in 1935. Another quote. Lynn, upon arriving in America, was arrested, put in a wooden building, made a prisoner. I was here for one autumn. The Americans did not allow me to the land. I was ordered to be deported, and that took place at Angel Island. These photographs are from Angel Island here on the left, and then some Asian immigrants who came to the United States. They're going to compare those two excerpts we just read. Of course, he discussed how Ellis Island could inspire both hope and fear. He mentions that many passengers were anxious to kind of get on with their life. He viewed Ellis Island as a gateway to hope in the United States. In contrast, the Chinese immigrant's poem about Angel Island is bleak, hopeless. The author was unable to enter the United States. He was eventually imprisoned and deported. So the differences in the excerpt suggest that European immigrants were, on the whole, treated better than the Asian immigrants were treated coming to America. Once settled in America, immigrants often faced similar challenges and tough decisions. They had to decide where to settle, how to find work, how to deal with language and cultural barriers, as most had to learn a new language, new customs, find a job, find a home, and get comfortable all at once. A very difficult challenge. 13, what kind of discrimination did immigrants face in their new country here in the United States? Some immigrants faced housing discrimination, were forced to live in ghettos or ethnic neighborhoods. Others faced discrimination in the job place because of their country of origin or their religion. Asian immigrants were prohibited from becoming naturalized citizens in some cases and were not allowed to enter the United States at all in some instances. 14, list some examples of ethnic neighborhoods that emerged during the 1800s into the 1900s, many of which are still around today. You have Chinatown, both in New York City and many other cities across the United States. You have Little Italy in New York City. In Miami, where you had a lot of Cuban immigrants, Little Havana. In parts of Los Angeles, you have Koreatown, area where a lot of Korean immigrants came into the United States. These neighborhoods also provided a sense of hope, optimism, their homeland, something familiar. They had specialty shops, grocers, and clothing stores that provided a taste of their home, food, and culture. The left side here, this left photo here is Chinatown in New York City. Right photo is Little Italy in New York City. '15, how did Americanization programs help immigrants to adjust? In many cities, volunteer institutions known as settlement houses ran Americanization programs, helped newcomers and immigrants learn English, adopt a more American style of dress and diet. Question 16 kind of deals with the initial image we saw of a melting pot in the United States. Many Americans believed American society was a melting pot in which white people of all different nationalities blended together to create a single culture. The term came from the name of a play that had opened up in the early 1900s. Americans still see a large influx of both legal and illegal immigration on an annual basis, and the United States has been trending more and more diverse each and every year. Immigrants often faced nativist or people who believed in nativism. Nativism is a tendency to prefer native-born white Americans over new immigrants during the economic recessions, especially of the late 19th century. Competition for jobs and housing fueled nativist feelings and resentment towards immigrants. Basically came down to competition for jobs. If you saw more and more people coming in, you might get a little bit anxious and kind of feel you'd want to be more of a protective person and kind of close up the borders. In 1882, the United States Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. During this period of time, there's a lot of hostility towards Chinese laborers, which had led Congress to pass this act and prohibited immigration by Chinese laborers, limited the civil rights of Chinese immigrants already in America, and outlawed the naturalization of Chinese residents. So really an anti-Chinese bill in 1882. 19, how did immigrants transform American society? Well, first, it helped with economic growth and expansion, acquired citizenship, participated in the democratic process. Mexican Americans in the Southwest developed effective ranching techniques. The Chinese, Irish, and Mexican laborers helped to build railroads across the country. Equally as important, immigrants labored in coal mines, steel mills, textile mills, and factories. Immigrant women worked in factories as seamstresses, as laundresses, and doing piecework. Hello, Alexander Graham Bell, somebody hopefully you've heard of. He was an immigrant who helped to invent the telephone. The telephone transformed how people communicated. It allowed people to communicate regardless of distance, stimulated industrial growth, and promoted the use of telephones to communicate on a daily basis. 21, how did the new immigrants impact politics and unionization? Since many immigrants had factory jobs, they were motivated to make working conditions more humane, and as a result, many immigrants joined unions, including Mother Jones and Samuel Gompers. They both helped to promote the union movement within immigrant groups. And then the last question here, the lesson reflection. This is kind of somewhat of a contemporary question as well. What is your feeling about immigration in the United States and whether or not we should continue to be a melting pot? You could have two different views, I suppose. Yes, we're a nation of immigrants and deeply rooted in our culture. No, we're becoming a bit overcrowded. We already have many issues of poverty and citizens who are struggling. In 2018, 52% of children under the age of 18 lived in homes receiving government assistance. Open borders, illegal and legal immigration versus closed borders and only legal immigration. So that's kind of a debate. Open borders, you don't really care who's coming in. Everybody can kind of flood in. The other side would be close the borders, not to all immigrants, but just to illegal immigrants. And that would allow for legal immigration to kind of be the forefront of how you can come into the country and settle. Hopefully you enjoyed 9.4. Until next time, Mr. Clark is out.